I'm Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my corporate executive brother dismissed me as just a soldier and used my Purple Heart ceremony to mock military service in front of his colleagues. What he didn't know was that his company's CEO was a Gold Star father who had lost his son in Afghanistan. By the time their paths crossed at the annual board meeting, my brother learned that some sacrifices command respect in boardrooms he never imagined.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
I'm Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my corporate executive brother dismissed me as just a soldier and used my Purple Heart ceremony to mock military service in front of his colleagues. What he didn't know was that his company's CEO was a Gold Star father who had lost his son in Afghanistan. By the time their paths crossed at the annual board meeting, my brother learned that some sacrifices command respect in boardrooms he never imagined. The desert heat of Kandahar province still haunted my dreams, but today I stood in the cool marble halls of Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, wearing my dress blue uniform with every ribbon and medal earned through 8 years of dedicated service. The Purple Heart ceremony was supposed to be small, intimate, just the way I preferred it after everything I'd been through during my third deployment. Colonel Thompson called my name and I stepped forward with the same precision I'd maintained throughout my military career, despite the lingering stiffness in my left shoulder where the shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. The injury that earned me this medal had also earned me 6 months of grueling physical therapy and the end of my combat deployment dreams, but it hadn't diminished my pride in serving my country. The citation Colonel Thompson read aloud detailed the convoy ambush in Helmand Province, where I had dragged 3 wounded soldiers to safety while under direct enemy fire, sustaining multiple shrapnel wounds that required immediate evacuation to Germany. What it didn't mention were the nights I still woke up hearing Sergeant Williams calling for his mother, or how Private Chen had whispered "thank you" before losing consciousness in my arms. As the colonel pinned the Purple Heart to my uniform, the photographer captured the moment perfectly. Me standing at attention, the medal catching the afternoon light streaming through the ceremonial hall windows, my face showing the quiet dignity of someone who had earned recognition through sacrifice rather than ambition. Behind me, my husband, Captain James Rodriguez, stood in his own dress uniform, his expression radiating the kind of pride that comes from understanding the true cost of military service. This medal represented more than personal recognition. It symbolized every soldier who had served beside me, every mission we had completed together, every night we had stood watch so that people back home could sleep safely. For once, I felt genuinely proud of my achievements without needing anyone else's validation or approval. The small reception afterward was filled with fellow service members who understood the weight of what the ceremony meant. Stories were shared about deployments and sacrifices, about the brothers and sisters in arms who hadn't made it home, about the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. These were people who measured success in missions completed in lives saved, not in quarterly earnings or market share percentages. But as I held my medal and listened to the conversations around me, I couldn't shake the memory of last month's family dinner where my older brother Marcus had made it clear exactly what he thought of my military career. His words still echoed in my mind, sharp and dismissive, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never risked anything more valuable than a stock portfolio. That weekend, James and I drove the 4 hours from Fort Hamilton to Albany to celebrate with my family, carrying a framed copy of the Purple Heart ceremony photo along with the medal itself. Mom had prepared her famous enchiladas, and the dining room table was set with Abuela's good china that only came out for special occasions. Even my teenage nephew Diego had put away his video games for the evening, which meant Mom had made it clear this was a big deal. Marcus arrived exactly on time, as always, stepping out of his gleaming BMW in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly housing allowance.
At 35, he had climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Financial with ruthless efficiency, transforming himself from the awkward math nerd I remembered into a polished executive who spoke fluent corporate jargon and measured success exclusively in quarterly bonuses and stock options. He worked as Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, a title that sounded impressive, but essentially meant he convinced wealthy clients to trust Meridian Financial with their investment portfolios. His corner office overlooked Manhattan's financial district, and he never missed an opportunity to mention his access to the executive boardroom, where decisions affecting millions of dollars were made daily. As we gathered around the dinner table, I carefully placed the ceremony photograph next to my plate, the Purple Heart medal resting beside it in its presentation case. The image captured everything perfectly: the solemn dignity of the ceremony, Colonel Thompson pinning the medal to my uniform, James standing at attention behind me with unmistakable pride in his eyes. Dad picked up the photograph first, studying it with the careful attention he gave to everything I had ever achieved. His own father had served in Korea, and he understood the weight of military recognition in ways that didn't require explanation. Mom leaned over his shoulder, making soft sounds of appreciation, her eyes bright with the kind of maternal pride that made all the difficult moments worthwhile. "Mija, you look so strong, so dignified," she said, tracing the edge of the frame with one finger. "Your abuela would have been so proud to see this. She always said the Rodriguez family had warriors in our blood." Diego examined the medal with teenage fascination, asking thoughtful questions about the ceremony and what it felt like to receive recognition for military service. Even at 16, he seemed to grasp the significance of the moment in ways that surprised me with their maturity and respect. But Marcus barely glanced at the photograph before turning his attention to his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be work emails with the kind of practiced indifference he had perfected over years of family gatherings where the focus wasn't exclusively on his professional achievements. When conversation naturally turned to my ceremony and what the Purple Heart meant, Marcus finally looked up from his screen with the kind of patronizing smile he reserved for topics he considered beneath his attention.
"That's nice, Maria," Marcus said, barely glancing at the Purple Heart before returning to his phone. "Though I have to say, I'm always surprised by how much ceremony the military puts around these things. In the corporate world, we just get results and move on to the next quarter." The words hit like a slap across the face. Here was recognition for dragging wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire, being dismissed as excessive ceremony by someone whose biggest risk was a bad quarterly earnings report. James's jaw tightened beside me, and I felt his hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently in that way that meant he was fighting every instinct to speak up. But this was my family, my battle to fight, and he knew it. "Marcus," Dad said quietly, his voice carrying a warning tone I recognized from childhood. "Your sister earned this medal by saving lives under combat conditions. Show some respect." Marcus looked up from his phone with that practiced corporate smile he used during client presentations. "Oh, I respect it, Dad. I just think Maria could be doing so much more with her talents in the private sector instead of playing soldier for government wages." Playing soldier. The phrase echoed in my head like the sound of incoming mortars. This from someone who had never missed a meal, never slept on rocky ground, never held a dying friend in his arms while bullets cracked overhead. "The military gave me purpose, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "It taught me about sacrifice, leadership, and serving something bigger than myself." He waved his hand dismissively, as if my words were smoke he could clear from the air. "Look, I get it. The military is great for structure and discipline, but let's be honest. You're 32 years old with an economics degree from Syracuse. You could be making 6 figures in finance instead of collecting government paychecks and playing dress-up." Mom set down her fork with a sharp clink against the china. "Marcus Rodriguez, that is enough. Your sister was wounded serving her country." "And I'm sure it was very dramatic," he replied, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension he probably used on junior associates.
But in the real world, we measure success by results, not by how many ribbons you can pin to your chest.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The silence that followed was deafening. Diego stared at his plate, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. James's grip on my hand tightened. Dad's face had gone red with suppressed anger. Marcus seemed oblivious to the damage his words were causing, or maybe he just didn't care. He was already back to scrolling through his phone, probably checking stock prices or reviewing presentations for Monday's board meeting. "You know what your problem is, Maria?" he continued, without looking up. "You're addicted to praise for doing basic job requirements. In my world, if you don't go above and beyond expectations every single day, you get fired. There's no ceremony for doing what you're already being paid to do." I thought about Sergeant Williams, bleeding out in that Humvee while I dragged him to safety. About Private Chen, barely 19 years old, whispering prayers in Spanish as shrapnel tore through his leg. About the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. The knowledge that every decision could mean life or death for the soldiers under my command. "The military gave me purpose, Marcus," I said quietly. "It's about duty." He finally looked up, his expression showing the kind of pity usually reserved for children who still believed in fairy tales. "Duty doesn't pay for retirement, Maria. Duty doesn't buy houses or send kids to college. You're wasting your potential on idealistic nonsense when you could be building real wealth in the corporate world." The evening ended with strained goodbyes and promises to stay in touch that everyone knew were hollow. As James and I loaded our car for the drive back to Fort Hamilton, I could hear Marcus inside, already dominating conversation with stories about his latest business trip to London and the multi-million-dollar deal he was negotiating.
2 weeks after our Albany visit, I was deep in training exercises at Fort Drum when my phone started buzzing with notifications I couldn't immediately check due to the classified nature of our field operations. By the time I could step away from the secure area during lunch break, my rarely used LinkedIn account had exploded with activity I didn't understand. Dozens of new connection requests, comments on posts I hadn't made, and direct messages that ranged from supportive to confused to downright hostile. It took several minutes of scrolling through notifications to find the source, and when I did, my stomach dropped like I was back in that convoy watching the IED detonate in slow motion. Marcus had posted a lengthy update on his LinkedIn profile that morning, using my Purple Heart ceremony photo as the header image. The post was titled, "Real Leadership versus Military Theater, a Corporate Perspective on Value Creation." "I've been reflecting on the differences between military recognition and corporate achievement," he had written in that polished tone he used for client presentations. "My sister recently received what the military calls a Purple Heart, essentially recognition for getting injured while doing her job. In the corporate world, we call that a workplace accident, and we focus on preventing them, not celebrating them." I scrolled through his post in mounting horror as he systematically dissected military service using business terminology. He described my combat injuries as poor risk management and my rescue of wounded soldiers as basic team coordination that any competent manager would handle without fanfare. But the most damaging part came in his conclusion, where he used my Purple Heart ceremony photo to make a broader point about value creation versus value consumption. He argued that military personnel were essentially government employees who consumed taxpayer resources without generating measurable returns, while corporate executives like himself created wealth and jobs that actually benefited society. The photo shows my sister in full military dress uniform, surrounded by ceremony and pageantry that would make most Fortune 500 CEOs laugh. This is what government waste looks like: elaborate recognition for basic job performance that private sector employees handle every day without expecting medals or ceremonies. The post had generated over 800 reactions and 200 comments in just 6 hours.
Marcus's corporate network was engaging enthusiastically, with senior executives from various financial firms adding their own observations about military inefficiency and government waste. Several comments suggested that people like me were exactly the kind of entitled government employees who expected recognition for simply showing up to work. But what made my blood run cold were the responses from people who seemed to know details about military operations that shouldn't have been public knowledge. Technical discussions about convoy security protocols, specific information about deployment rotations, and references to classified programs that could only have come from someone with access to military personnel files. I screenshotted everything before Marcus could edit or delete any content, my hands shaking as I documented how my brother had turned my Purple Heart ceremony into a corporate networking opportunity while potentially compromising operational security. The comments were brutal. His colleagues and connections had latched onto his narrative about military inefficiency, dissecting everything from my facial expression in the ceremony photo to whether wounded veterans deserved medical benefits. Someone had shared the image to other professional networks with commentary about participation trophy culture in government employment. My phone rang as I sat in my car in the Fort Drum parking lot, trying to process the scope of what Marcus had unleashed. James's voice was tight with controlled anger when he answered. "Maria, I've been monitoring the post since this morning. It's worse than just professional embarrassment. He's revealed operational details that could compromise base security, and he's doing it to advance his own corporate brand at your expense."
Over the next 24 hours, Marcus's LinkedIn post continued spreading through financial industry networks, generating the kind of engagement that corporate executives dream about. His follower count increased by 2,000 professionals, and 3 different business podcasts had reached out requesting interviews about his innovative perspective on government efficiency. Meanwhile, I was dealing with inquiries from my chain of command. Several senior NCOs had seen the post or heard about it from others in their professional networks. Most were supportive, expressing outrage on my behalf and offering to help however they could. But a few seemed uncomfortable around me, as if they wondered whether there might be some truth to Marcus's implications about military recognition being inflated. Master Sergeant Patricia Williams from the Base Public Affairs Office called me into her office Thursday morning. She was a RAC veteran with 2 Bronze Stars who had zero tolerance for anything that undermined military personnel or operational security. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, sliding into the chair across from me, "I've been monitoring social media discussions related to your brother's post, and we have some concerns that go beyond hurt feelings." She opened her laptop and showed me screenshots I hadn't seen before. Comments on Marcus's post from people who seemed to have detailed knowledge of convoy operations, deployment schedules, and base security protocols. Technical discussions about Purple Heart eligibility requirements that revealed more about military medical procedures than should have been available to civilians. "What's particularly concerning," Williams continued, "is that your brother's post has been shared in several online communities that actively monitor U.S. military operations. Whether he intended this or not, his commentary about government waste and military inefficiency is being used by groups that seek to undermine public support for military funding and personnel." She showed me forums where my Purple Heart photo was being used alongside other military images to support arguments that defense spending was wasteful, that veterans' benefits were excessive, and that people like me represented everything wrong with government employment. My ceremony photo had become a symbol in debates I had never wanted to be part of. But the most troubling development involved something I hadn't anticipated. Several users responding to Marcus's post had identified specific details about my unit, my deployment history, and my current duty station that could only have come from someone with access to military databases or personnel files. "The operational security implications are significant," Williams explained. "Your brother may not realize it, but his post has attracted attention from entities that actively collect intelligence on U.S. military capabilities and personnel. You're now a person of interest to both domestic groups that oppose military spending and foreign actors who monitor American defense activities."
She pulled out a thick folder containing documentation I hadn't seen before. Social media monitoring reports showing how my image and Marcus's commentary were spreading through networks specifically designed to gather intelligence on military operations. Analysis of comment patterns suggesting coordinated information gathering rather than spontaneous engagement. We're implementing enhanced security protocols for your clearance level effective immediately, she said. Anyone whose military service has been compromised through unauthorized disclosure gets additional protection and monitoring. This isn't punishment, it's recognition that your brother's actions have created security vulnerabilities that require institutional response. That afternoon, I called James from the base parking lot, trying to process how a family dinner conversation had escalated into a military security matter. His voice carried the calm authority that made him such an effective officer, but I could hear the underlying tension. Maria, I've been researching corporate policies at major financial firms, and what Marcus has done could violate several professional conduct standards. Most investment companies have strict guidelines about social media use, especially content that could damage their reputation or expose them to liability. He paused, and when he continued, there was something different in his tone. Something that suggested he had discovered information that changed the entire situation. But there's something else you need to know about Meridian Financial and Marcus's position there. Something that's going to make his LinkedIn post much more problematic than he realizes.
That evening, James arrived home with printouts and his laptop, wearing the focused expression that meant he had spent hours researching something that concerned him deeply. I've been digging into Marcus's social media activity and his position at Meridian Financial, he said, settling beside me at our kitchen table. What he's done goes far beyond family cruelty. He opened his laptop and showed me Marcus's professional profile, highlighting details I had overlooked. Over the past 6 months, my brother had been systematically building his personal brand around military corporate leadership comparisons, using his relationship with me as credibility for his expertise in government efficiency analysis. He's not just mocking your service, Maria, James explained, scrolling through months of posts. He's monetized it. Look at this speaking engagement from 3 months ago where he was paid $15,000 to present corporate excellence versus military mediocrity at a financial services conference. The evidence was damning. Email confirmations for paid consulting work where Marcus positioned himself as having insider knowledge of military operations through family connections. LinkedIn articles where he used details from our private conversations to support his arguments about government waste. Corporate training contracts where he promised to deliver real-world analysis of military inefficiency based on personal military family experience. But the most disturbing discovery was his systematic documentation of our family interactions. Screenshots of text conversations where I had shared deployment stories, photos from family gatherings where I appeared in uniform, even details about my medical treatment and rehabilitation that he had somehow obtained and was using in his corporate presentations. He's built an entire revenue stream around attacking military service, Maria, James continued, showing me financial records he had obtained through professional networks. Speaking fees, consulting contracts, and corporate training seminars, all based on his claimed expertise about military inefficiency derived from having a sister in the Army. The calculated nature of Marcus's exploitation was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't spontaneous family cruelty or thoughtless social media posting. He had developed a systematic business model based on extracting commercial value from my military service, using our family relationship as his qualification to speak authoritatively about defense spending and veteran benefits. James pulled up the most damaging evidence yet, a consulting proposal Marcus had submitted to a defense contracting company where he offered to provide insider analysis of military personnel psychology and operational inefficiency based on direct
family access to active duty personnel. He's essentially selling access to you and your military service to corporate clients, James said, his voice carrying controlled anger. Every family dinner, every conversation about your deployment, every detail about your injury and recovery, he's been treating it all as market research for his corporate consulting practice. The scope of the violation was staggering. Marcus hadn't just mocked my Purple Heart ceremony, he had transformed my entire military career into a commodity that generated income for his corporate consulting practice. Every sacrifice, every deployment separation, every night I had spent in pain during recovery, all of it had become content for his professional presentations. But James had discovered something that would change everything. Meridian Financial has very strict policies about employee social media use and outside consulting work, he said, pulling up the company's professional conduct guidelines. What Marcus has been doing violates multiple corporate policies, and his LinkedIn post about your Purple Heart ceremony just provided documentation of systematic violations that could end his career.
James spent the weekend building a comprehensive case that approached Marcus's activities from multiple angles simultaneously. Corporate policy violations, unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, and commercial exploitation of military personnel. But the most significant element he discovered would change everything. "I've been researching Meridian Financial's corporate structure and client base," James said Sunday evening, surrounded by legal documents and printouts. "Your brother's LinkedIn post isn't just a personal embarrassment, it's a massive liability exposure for his company." He showed me Meridian Financial's client portfolio, highlighting names I recognized from news coverage of military contracting and defense spending. Several of the firm's largest institutional clients were defense contractors, military veteran organizations, and government pension funds that managed retirement accounts for active duty personnel. Marcus has been publicly attacking military service and veteran benefits while his company manages hundreds of millions in assets for the exact people he's been mocking, James explained. His LinkedIn post essentially branded Meridian Financial as anti-military, which could cost them major contracts and client relationships. But James had discovered something even more damaging. Meridian Financial's CEO and board chairman was Robert Castellanos, a Gold Star father whose son, Lieutenant Michael Castellanos, had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The company's website featured a prominent memorial page honoring fallen service members, and Castellanos had personally donated over $2 million to veteran support organizations. "Your brother has been working for a Gold Star father while building a consulting business around mocking military service and veteran recognition," James said, pulling up Castellanos' biography. The same CEO who created the Military Family Support Fund has an employee publicly calling Purple Heart recipients examples of government waste and military theater. The irony was devastating. Marcus's entire corporate career existed under the leadership of someone who had lost his only child to the same kind of combat operations where I had been wounded. Every paycheck Marcus received was signed by someone who understood the true cost of military service in ways that went far beyond quarterly earnings reports. James had also obtained copies of Meridian Financial's employee handbook and social media policies. Clear prohibitions against public statements that could damage company reputation, mandatory approval for outside consulting work, and specific guidelines about respecting military service members in all professional communications. He's violated at least 6 different corporate policies with his LinkedIn post and consulting activities, James continued. But more importantly, he's created a situation where his employer's biggest clients could interpret his statements as representing company values that directly contradict their own interests. The evidence was overwhelming. Defense contractors who entrusted Meridian Financial with their employee pension funds, military veteran organizations that had invested retirement accounts with the firm, government agencies that utilized Meridian's services for personal benefits management. All of them now had documentation that a senior company executive publicly viewed military service as wasteful government theater.
The beautiful thing about this approach, James explained, is that we don't need to take any aggressive action. Corporate liability and client relationships will handle the consequences automatically. When Robert Castellanos sees what his senior vice president has been posting about Purple Heart recipients, the institutional response will be swift and final. But James had saved the most devastating discovery for last. Marcus's consulting work and speaking engagements violated federal regulations regarding outside employment for financial services executives, creating potential SEC violations that could affect his professional licensing and future employment in the industry. He built his consulting brand around attacking military service while working for a company that serves military clients, and he did it without proper disclosure or approval. The regulatory violations alone could end his career in financial services permanently. The case James had built was elegant in its precision. No threats, no personal attacks, just systematic documentation of professional violations that would trigger automatic institutional responses once the right people became aware of them.
Monday morning, James presented me with a strategy that was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Marcus directly or pursuing lengthy legal proceedings, he would let corporate accountability systems handle the situation through proper channels. We're going to provide documentation to the appropriate people and let institutional policies work exactly as they were designed, James explained, reviewing the materials he had prepared over the weekend. No threats, no ultimatums, just comprehensive evidence delivered to individuals who have the authority and responsibility to act on policy violations. His approach was methodical and precise. First, a formal complaint to Meridian Financial's corporate compliance department documenting Marcus's unauthorized outside consulting work and social media activity that violated company policies. Second, notification to the SEC about potential violations of financial services regulations regarding undisclosed outside employment. Third, copies of all documentation sent directly to CEO Robert Castellanos with a cover letter explaining how his senior vice president's public statements about military service might affect client relationships. But the most effective element of James's strategy involved something I hadn't anticipated. He had identified 3 major defense contractors and 2 veteran organization pension funds that comprised nearly 40% of Meridian Financial's assets under management. These clients had specific contractual requirements about working with firms that demonstrated respect for military service and veteran affairs. We're going to provide documentation to the appropriate people and let institutional policies work exactly as they were designed, James explained, reviewing the materials he had prepared over the weekend. No threats, no ultimatums, just comprehensive evidence delivered to individuals who have the authority and responsibility to act on policy violations. The beauty of the approach was its complete adherence to proper procedures while being utterly devastating to Marcus's career prospects. Corporate compliance departments moved swiftly when presented with documented policy violations. Military-focused clients protected their reputations by distancing themselves from firms that might be perceived as anti-military. SEC investigations followed systematic processes that didn't consider family relationships or good intentions. James had prepared a timeline that would ensure maximum impact with minimal personal involvement from us. The compliance complaint and SEC notification would be filed simultaneously on Tuesday morning. The client notifications would be sent Wednesday, allowing corporate legal departments time to review the implications before taking action. The direct communication to CEO Castellanos would arrive Thursday, providing him with complete documentation just before the company's monthly board meeting. By Friday afternoon, Marcus will understand that attacking military personnel carries professional consequences he never anticipated, James said, sealing the final envelope containing documentation for Meridian Financial's board of directors. The institutional response will be swift, comprehensive, and completely legitimate. That evening, we sat on our apartment balcony overlooking Fort Hamilton,
watching the lights of military installations twinkle across New York Harbor. Somewhere in Manhattan, Marcus was probably preparing presentations for his next corporate consulting engagement, confident that his LinkedIn post about my Purple Heart ceremony had enhanced his professional credibility in financial services circles. He had no idea that his systematic exploitation of military service was about to collide with institutional systems specifically designed to protect the interests of veterans, active duty personnel, and their families. The same corporate frameworks he had spent years mastering were about to demonstrate that some battles couldn't be won through quarterly earnings reports and client presentations. James's phone buzzed with a text from Master Sergeant Williams, confirming that military public affairs had completed their security review and would be implementing enhanced protection protocols for personnel whose service had been compromised through unauthorized disclosure. The institutional machinery was already in motion, operating according to established procedures that prioritized mission security over family relationships. For the first time since Marcus posted that LinkedIn content, I felt completely at peace with the path forward. Military institutions protected their own through systematic accountability, not personal revenge. Corporate systems enforce professional standards according to established policies, not emotional appeals. And sometimes those two frameworks aligned perfectly to demonstrate that attacking military service carried consequences in both worlds.
The response was swift and devastating. By Tuesday afternoon, Meridian Financial's compliance department had initiated a formal investigation into Marcus's unauthorized consulting activities and social media violations. By Wednesday morning, 2 major defense contractor pension funds had requested immediate meetings to discuss their concerns about continued partnership with the firm. But the real damage came Thursday when CEO Robert Castellanos received James's comprehensive documentation package just hours before the monthly board meeting. According to my contact in military public affairs, who had connections throughout the veteran business community, Castellanos spent less than 10 minutes reviewing the materials before calling an emergency executive session. The LinkedIn post that Marcus had believed enhanced his professional credibility had instead provided his Gold Star father CEO with documented evidence that his senior vice president publicly viewed Purple Heart recipients as examples of government waste and military theater. The same executive who signed Marcus's paychecks had buried his only son with full military honors 3 years earlier. Marcus's phone began ringing Thursday afternoon with calls he couldn't understand. His corporate consulting clients were canceling contracts, citing concerns about potential liability from association with anti-military commentary. The 3 business podcasts that had wanted to interview him about government efficiency suddenly withdrew their invitations after their military-focused sponsors expressed concerns about the content. By Friday morning, the financial services industry's professional networks were quietly circulating information about Meridian Financial's military situation. Defense contractors who utilize the firm for employee benefits management were reviewing their contractual requirements about working with companies that demonstrated appropriate respect for military service. Veteran organization pension funds were scheduling emergency meetings to discuss potential conflicts of interest. But the most significant development came at 2:30 Friday afternoon, when Marcus was called into CEO Castellanos' office for what he assumed would be a routine performance review. Instead, he found himself facing the father of Lieutenant Michael Castellanos, along with the company's general counsel and head of human resources. According to sources James had cultivated in financial industry networks, the meeting lasted exactly 12 minutes. Castellanos placed printouts of Marcus's LinkedIn post and consulting materials on his desk, along with client correspondence expressing concerns about continued business relationships with Meridian Financial. Mr. Rodriguez, Castellanos had said, his voice carrying the controlled grief of someone who understood military sacrifice in ways that went beyond corporate metrics. You've spent the past 6 months building a consulting business around mocking the same military service that cost me my son. Your LinkedIn post calls Purple Heart recipients examples of government waste and military theater.
Marcus had tried to explain that his commentary was about government efficiency, not disrespect for military service. But Castellanos cut him off with the kind of quiet authority that comes from genuine loss rather than corporate posturing. My son died serving his country in Afghanistan. Your sister was wounded serving her country in Afghanistan. The difference between you and me, Mr. Rodriguez, is that I understand what that service costs, while you've been profiting from mocking it. The termination was immediate and comprehensive. Severance package voided due to policy violations, professional references limited to confirmation of employment dates, non-compete clauses enforced to prevent him from taking clients or proprietary information to competitors, security escort from the building within the hour. But Marcus's professional destruction extended beyond Meridian Financial. The SEC investigation into his undisclosed consulting work had triggered reviews of his professional licenses and certifications. 3 major financial firms that might have considered hiring him had already received informal notifications about his regulatory issues and public statements regarding military service. The LinkedIn post that was supposed to establish his credibility as a thought leader had instead created a permanent professional liability. Corporate headhunters who specialized in financial services were quietly warning their clients about the military situation surrounding Marcus Rodriguez, making him effectively unemployable in his chosen field. That weekend, my phone buzzed constantly with panicked calls from Marcus that I didn't answer and increasingly desperate text messages asking me to fix this misunderstanding before his career was permanently destroyed. Mom called repeatedly, pleading with me to contact CEO Castellanos and explain that Marcus hadn't meant to disrespect military service. But James's strategy had been designed to operate through institutional channels that didn't recognize family relationships or emotional appeals. Corporate compliance policies existed to protect companies from liability exposure. SEC regulations enforced professional standards without consideration for personal circumstances. Client relationship management prioritized fiduciary responsibilities over individual employee situations. Marcus had built his consulting brand around attacking military service while working for a Gold Star father and serving military-focused clients. The institutional response was automatic and final, triggered by his own documented violations rather than personal vendetta or family conflict.
Sunday evening, as James and I sat together reviewing news coverage of increased military personnel protections and corporate accountability measures, my phone rang one final time with Marcus's number. This time, I answered. "Maria, please." His voice was different than I had ever heard it before, stripped of corporate confidence and reduced to something raw and desperate. "I've lost everything. My job, my clients, my professional reputation. You have to help me fix this." I looked out our window toward the lights of Fort Hamilton, where military personnel continued their missions regardless of civilian opinion or family drama, and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for weeks. "Marcus, you spent months building a business around mocking military service and Purple Heart recipients. The fact that you're facing professional consequences for those choices isn't something I can fix. It's something you earned." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of institutional accountability finally reaching someone who had assumed corporate success made him immune to the consequences of attacking military personnel. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a bewilderment that would have been pathetic if it weren't so revealing. "But I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to build my consulting brand. I didn't know there would be real consequences for some social media posts." Real consequences for social media posts, as if Purple Heart ceremonies were content for professional networking rather than recognition for service members who had bled for their country, as if Gold Star fathers evaluated employee performance based on quarterly earnings rather than character and integrity. "Some institutions protect what matters to them, Marcus," I said quietly. "Military service matters to more people than you realized, including the people
who sign your paychecks.
6 months later, I stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, receiving the Army Commendation Medal for my work developing new protocols that protected military personnel from social media exploitation and unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's attack on my Purple Heart ceremony had ultimately led to enhanced protections for thousands of service members. The ceremony was attended by senior military officials, including General Patricia Morrison, who had implemented the new social media security guidelines across all service branches. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's experience revealed systematic vulnerabilities in how we protect our personnel from civilian exploitation, she said during her remarks. The protocols developed from her case will prevent similar attacks on military families for years to come. Marcus's professional destruction had been swift and permanent. The SEC investigation concluded with sanctions that prevented him from working in financial services for 5 years. His consulting business collapsed when clients learned about the regulatory violations and anti-military commentary. Last I heard, he was working in retail management in Albany, living with our parents, while trying to rebuild a career outside the corporate world that had once defined his identity. But the most significant outcome involved Robert Castellanos and Meridian Financial's response to the situation. The company had established a $2 million military family support fund in Lieutenant Michael Castellanos' honor, providing financial assistance to families of wounded veterans and Gold Star families. CEO Castellanos had personally called to apologize for his former employee's conduct and to thank me for my service. Your brother's actions reminded me that protecting military families extends beyond just supporting those who serve, Castellanos had said during our conversation. It includes ensuring that the institutions they work with demonstrate appropriate respect for their sacrifice. That evening, James and I sat on our apartment balcony overlooking Fort Hamilton, watching the steady lights of military installations across New York Harbor. My phone had been quiet for weeks now. No panicked calls from Marcus, no pleading messages from family members asking me to fix a situation that had been resolved through proper institutional channels. The enhanced security clearance I had received as a result of the incident had opened opportunities for specialized assignments and advanced training that would have taken years to access through normal career progression. Military personnel protection protocols were being implemented across all branches, using my case as the template for defending service members from civilian exploitation. James's legal strategy had worked exactly as designed: systematic, institutional, and completely devastating to someone who assumed corporate success made him immune to consequences for attacking military service. No personal revenge, no family confrontation, just proper accountability administered through established professional and regulatory frameworks. My phone buzzed with a text from Master Sergeant Williams, updating me on the latest statistics from the new protection protocols. Over 400 cases of military personnel exploitation had been identified and resolved using the procedures developed from my experience with Marcus. Some battles end with apologies and reconciliation. Others end with institutional change that protects people who serve something larger than themselves. This had been the latter type of battle, won through proper channels rather than personal retaliation. The lights of Fort Hamilton continued their steady rhythm across the harbor, representing service and sacrifice that transcended family dynamics and corporate metrics. Military institutions protected their own according to established protocols, not personal relationships. And sometimes those protections extended into civilian worlds where people learned that attacking military members carried consequences they never anticipated.
Marcus had dismissed me as just a soldier, not understanding that soldiers serve institutions powerful enough to reach into corporate boardrooms and financial services regulations when their personnel are threatened. He had learned that some ceremonies command respect in places he never imagined, and some sacrifices create accountability that extends far beyond quarterly earnings reports.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.